everybody. Thanks for watching. Thank you guys for taking the time to purchase the DVD or download the video. I really appreciate you guys' support. As always, again, it's so much information that I have to put into this DVD, which is why it took a while for it to come out. It's a lot about Moorish history that people don't understand. You know, the Moors play a huge role in history, bigger than people understand. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to wait to put this DVD out, to kind of give you guys a little bit background, that you don't understand pertains to this DVD yet, but you will as you watch. And you can see where things fit, where pieces fit, as far as a lot of questions that you guys might have that I may not have answered yet, or you may not have found the answer to yet. But the Moors play a huge role in that. And the problem with us as Black people is whenever we see Black people doing something great, that is considered good or great, in some kind of position of power or greatness, we jump on the bandwagon. A lot of people don't really do much research into things. They just say, well, the Moors, and they civilized, Europe and everything, so they must be good dudes or what have you. And people don't really understand, more, or, what that whole thing really is about. It's so much deception, so much confusion wrapped up in the Moors that a lot of people don't really understand, the difference between a Moor, a black Moor, the Moors that they connect with the Arabs as far as the, the slave trade and what was going on in Spain and everything like that. Because when you look up, Moor, the first thing it's going to go to is Muslims. You're going to hear words like Berber or Beber. And, it's a lot of confusion that we're going to really straighten out in this DVD so you can really understand who the Moors are. They are not who you think they are. So you got to really, pay attention. But we're going to get into this, and it's a lot more because the Moors play the key role to me in my research in the rise of European power throughout Europe. And we got to understand. And it's a lot that is hidden because of that. And we're going to reveal it a lot because there's no way they can hide all the information, of course. And a lot of scholars, people was into information around that time, so they put out a lot of information. So we got a lot to get into. So, let's start. So now we always talk about the Greeks, the Romans, the Ionians, and how everybody came into Kemet to learn. How everybody came into Kemet to get the information, to learn from the ancient Egyptians, to learn about the mystery schools or what have you. What we have to understand is, one, if you had Romans and you had Greeks and you had all these people coming into Kemet getting knowledge, we forget about the Africans that was already there. We forget about the Black people that already existed, of course, in Africa, that prior to any European getting knowledge, these Africans must have already gotten the knowledge. They must have had already set up civilizations and had, knowledge prior to Europeans coming in. See, we only focus on Europeans, and we don't realize that, hey, yeah, Africans came into Kemet long before any European. Africans had the knowledge, they passed it down, they put up civilizations, and they had this information for a long time before any European ever touched it. In fact, they were teaching Europeans not just in Kemet, but other places in Africa. And you really have to understand that. Remember, I brought this up in a whole video on YouTube about the many hidden accomplishments of African people. So you got to go back and look and understand. Remember, when I was talking about, all these great kingdoms, the Kerma kingdom, the kingdoms along the Swahili coast, and all these kingdoms that existed, for a long time. So we got to realize that, even if you want to go BC, we had African kingdoms. We had African kings that still ruled, that still was teaching Europeans. You had Europeans for a long time, or Aryans, as you can call them, before they became Europeans. Before they became, Europeans, Aryans. And that's something you got to understand too, because again, we give them that name, European, giving away Europe. We're putting them synonymous with Europe, with the land. So that already automatically gives them the land. Just like we say Africa, you're an African, that gives you Africa. But we can't do that with Europe. You might as well call Europe Africa because that's ours as well. So we got to understand, Aryan is the proper term you should call them, because that's what they was called back then when they came down from the north to basically start, blending in. But, we all used to European, that name. So, use it however. But, the Aryans came down and, started getting into positions of power, what have you. And I went through this in the Buddhism DVD. But we got to understand, before that even happened, of course, in Africa, Africans was getting knowledge. They was understanding astrology, math, building, or what have you, and they built, great civilizations. So yes, of course, the Africans had all kind of knowledge. They knew about math and astrology, building, or what have you, before the Europeans came in there. Not to mention that, there's so many different, plants, fruits, vegetables, minerals, spices, things that Europeans had never seen or tasted or touched before that the Africans had. When you think about the resources that's in Africa, today even, and how much Africa feeds the world, and how, most of the resources that we have come from there. So you can imagine back then, how they had so many resources to themselves before, colonization. So many people came into Africa, which, getting resources and trading with the Africans, and they had, much of these resources to themselves. So it was things that people never seen before. They only heard about, that they was coming into Africa to experience and to learn. And it wasn't just the Egyptians that was teaching. There was so many different kingdoms throughout Africa that had this knowledge and had these different kinds of trade goods that they was trading or what have you. So it's not so much of a case, with the Moors coming into Europe and civilizing the Europeans during the Dark Ages. We got to go back before that. That's the case that people give to the Moors, or they civilized the Europeans. I mean, the Europeans just simply didn't have the knowledge. They just didn't know yet. They didn't know about a lot of stuff. And the Africans basically had all the information. It's just that simple. When you go back and you start doing the research, this is what you find, that they had the information, and that they was teaching, not just in Kemet, throughout Africa and different places. And this is what the Europeans was coming into Africa for, and getting this information. And it was known by them and everybody that the Africans had this information and they had this knowledge. So now understand, it's not so much about the Moors civilizing the Europeans during the Dark Ages. The Moors did so much more than that. We don't have to really defend our position on this planet as far as, creating civilizations before Europeans. And that's the problem. We get into debates where a lot of Europeans want to say, well, we was here first. They want to claim Europe before we was even there. How is that possible? When, all races come from African people, and we can prove that, of course, we was in Europe long before them. So we don't really have to debate that. That is proven scientifically, even though they want to cover it up. It's been proven. So we don't have to get into all that. Now, as far as Spain, and of course, Spain is right there. Africa, North Africa right there. You got Spain right there. Kemet is right there. And you find a lot of Egyptian artifacts in Spain. As a matter of fact, you go to Morocco, you cross the Straits of Gibraltar, you end up in the Iberian Peninsula, which is a mountainous region of Portugal and Spain. So in that region is where they found the earliest example of written text in the whole Iberian Peninsula. And that was belonging to a cremation urn of Apophis, Pharaoh Apophis. Remember, Apophis was ruling on the throne during the second intermediate period of Kemet, when the Hyksos was ruling. So they found, his urn. They found other Egyptian artifacts. They found bowl, his sister name on it. And it's dated between 16 and 15 BCE, the 16th and 15th century BCE, excuse me. So we have that. Then you also have a lot of what they call necropolis. A necropolis is basically like an ancient cemetery. They found about 15 tombs with bodies and these alabaster vases with cartouches on them. And, so much artifacts that's belonging to the ancient Egyptians. So that's dated between the 9th and the 7th century BCE. So you have all this information, all these artifacts, and there's so much information throughout the world that we find pertaining to African people or the ancient Egyptians, as far as our position in many different civilizations throughout the world. So we don't have to debate that. And the Moors did more than that, and it's more before the Moors. And it's just so much controversies wrapped up in the Moors, which we're going to straighten out in this video. But it's a lot more history that goes with African people than a lot of people understand, that's before Kemet, during the time of Kemet, around the same time. And we put so much focus on Kemet that we forget about the rest of Africa and what was going on. So now getting into the rise of the European powers, you got to understand, how this stuff started. It's this notion that white people are not human, that they didn't, come from this planet, all kinds of crazy things out there about the white race, because we see so much destruction, so much evil from Europeans throughout the centuries. Again, you got to understand, they came from us. It's already been proven. The mutation that happened in Africans has been found. It's proven. It is unchallenged. It is 100% without effect proven that they come from us. There's no way around it. No matter how much hate you may have for Europeans, it's the truth. It's just basically what happened. And the reason why we can't find overall established civilizations for Europeans is because they came from us. All the other civilizations was taken. It's just that simple. People say that, the Egyptians was experimenting and that's how you get white people and all kinds of stuff like that. It just doesn't fit with the mutation. Now, if it only happened in people, then we could say that's weird. That, only people, black people, Africans had this mutation. But when you find the same mutation in other species and animals or what have you, that matches exactly with the same mutation that happened in Africans, it's over right there. It's case closed. And this is what they don't want us to know, because they use it to keep us separated. That plain and simple, they came from us. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that's one of the reasons why we know for sure, one, there was no Europeans in Africa before us, of course, because they couldn't survive there. This is why you're going to hear this term sub-Saharan African a lot. I'm going to get into this later, because they basically trying to steal North Africa for a reason, but they want to, of course, say sub-Saharan Africa because it's hotter below there. It's more, plausible that they survived in the north, which they did set up civilizations in North Africa, which we're going to talk about as well. But of course, no Europeans could come into Africa and stay in Africa very long and remain white. It's just not possible. It just can't be done scientifically. Thousands of years of Europeans being in Africa and still have that white creamy color or what have you. Impossible. So we got to understand that. That's what the whole vampire thing is about, if you didn't understand that. The whole vampire thing is about them basically not being able to survive in the sun. You got vampires, pale white skin, they drink blood. The whole blood thing basically having to do with genetics, because two white people can only make another white person. So the only way you can become a vampire is to have the blood of one. So it's all talking about genetics. It's easy to see the comparison where you have a vampire stepping out into the sun and burning up. Same thing happened with Europeans. Now, what's basically happening with the skin is with black people, with people who have a lot of melanin, it's because of the sun. Now, the more sun that is exposed on your skin, the more melanin your body basically produces. Melanin is sent to the cells to protect it, from the sun. So the hotter the sun, the more melanin, which you have which is why you have in Africa so many really, really dark Africans when it's really hot. So, the melanin goes and protects the cells, and, it will produce and keep producing melanin to protect the cells from the sun. So the cells is not getting destroyed. Your skin may get, hot, but the cells will remain fine and you can recover from that. You see what starts to happen first with Europeans is their skin start to peel. And if you look at any pictures of bad sunburns, which I won't put any up, you'll see the boils or what happens. The skin gets really red, because with Europeans having a lack of melanin, instead of their body sending melanin to the heated area when the sun is on your skin, it sends blood, and blood goes there instead of melanin. And, you see what happens. It's not a nice thing. They get all red and it turns horrible. So they understand that with vampires. They understood that, which is why they created that. And it's not a coincidence when they came up with Blade, that Blade is black, the Daywalker. Just happened to be a black dude who can walk in the sun. So they understand, they role and position as relation to the sun. And that's pretty much what a lot of this stuff is about, which we're going to talk about later, melanin, because, it's a lot more to it. And it all fits together with this whole Moors thing, as you will see. But you got to understand, one, of course, they couldn't be in Africa much longer. But before that ever happened, when you get into the migration story, of course, Africans was leaving Africa and they was exploring. So the theory, which really is no longer a theory, Africans went north, plain and simple. They went north into Europe, further north, and got trapped in the Ice Age. It's just, everything adds up. They got trapped in the Ice Age. So again, as I was saying, your skin, when it's exposed to the sun, produces melanin. Your melanin needs the sun to continue to reproduce itself, plain and simple. Without the sun, melanin cannot reproduce itself. So again, if you don't understand that black people do get a little bit lighter when there's no sun. In the wintertime, do a comparison. Your skin does get lighter when there's a lack of sun. So we're talking about thousands of years of no sun exposure to the skin, because these Africans was forced to live in caves to survive. They got trapped in the Ice Age, and it was so cold outside that if any of the elements, the wind or what have you, touch your skin, it would freeze in seconds. So they had to live underground. They had to live in caves. So everything fits when you understand. We always say, well, Europeans, y'all came from caves. Well, no, those were the Africans that went into caves thousands of years ago. So when you understand, thousands of years of, no sun, not seeing the sun, not experiencing the warmth of the sun, living underground, living in caves, a mutation happened. It's just that simple. A mutation occurred. And when those African women start giving birth to those white babies, it was the mutation that happened. Now, the whole thing is, to me, it would be suspect. The whole story, when I first started doing the research on it, was weird about the mutation. You start really understanding how it happened. Yeah, okay, it started to make sense. But the killer, the dagger, is when Dr. Keith Chang found the same mutation in the zebrafish. Now, the first thing I said was, why zebrafish? And then you got to understand that zebrafish is a tropical fish, but they basically native to the Himalayas, to Tibet, North India, and they just so happen to get trapped in the same ice age. So this is why you had the zebrafish with spots, stripes, and some without the stripes. And of course, he found the same mutation that occurred in them, in us.
One more important piece of the puzzle was found in 2005, when cancer researcher Keith Chang was studying the black and white stripes of zebrafish.
There are a lot of zebrafish in my laboratory because I'm a geneticist and I study how mutations occur, which is how cancer occurs, and I use pigmentation to detect those mutations. By chance, the light skin-colored fish that I used for that research also taught us a lot about how Europeans, how humans became lighter skinned.
What Professor Chang discovered was perhaps one of the most important genetic mutations ever found. A single change among literally billions of coded instructions within zebrafish DNA that reduced black pigment from their stripes. Soon after, this identical genetic mutation was found in fair-skinned Europeans.
There was a magic moment in this research. When I got back the results that showed that the number and the size and the amount of pigment in the light-skinned zebrafish were all diminished, and the same thing happened in humans. When I opened the textbook and saw that same thing, I began to sweat. Not only did light-skinned people evolve from black-skinned people, but lighter-skinned people, whether they're European or whether they're Asian, like me, were actually mutants of the dark-skinned people.
This was remarkable because we had only inferred on the basis of circumstantial evidence that this must have occurred in evolution, but we didn't have any concrete genetic evidence. Now we do.
So now I know I showed that video to you guys before, but it's really important that you understand that. You understand that this took place and that it's proven. Going to be hard for some people to accept, but it's the truth. It's unchallenged. There's no debate on this genetic research. again, you already had the Chinese coming forward and saying, hey, we come from African people, we come from Africa. So everything, scientifically, all the proof, all the facts points to Africans being the mother and father of all races. So people got to get over it and just accept the fact, accept the truth. It's not something that we're trying to brag about. It's just something that is proven, something that is a fact. And people got to get. You have to understand that, one, if you put cells in any kind of condition, they will adapt to survive. That's what stem cell research is all about. That's what stem cells is all about. So if you put a cell around something, it will basically adapt to it over time. So you can clone that way because the cell will mimic its surroundings in order to blend in and fit in and to survive. Cells are amazing when you understand what they can do. So when you understand a mutation, the mutation that occurred, it basically occurred because the cells was adapting to its cold surroundings. It's common sense. It fits. It works. Even without the scientific research, you can understand how this mutation could have happened with cells when you just understand alone that cells will always adapt to its surroundings in order to survive. So again, you don't need big nose and that cold. You don't need the big lips. You do need longer hair. The skin does not need to be all melanated, and this happened. But again, the dagger is we have the actual mutation. We found it in not just in zebrafish, but in other animals as well, which is why we have albinos throughout the world. I mean, the mutation happened, it occurred. Now, we can get all spooky with it and say, well, maybe somebody put the mutation out there or what have you. So many ways you can look at the situation, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that all races come from African people, and you got to understand that. Now, it's a major reason why I really want you to get that we'll get into later as we go along. So thousands of years trapped in the ice age. Thousands of years go by, the ice age ends, the ice starts to melt, and a way is open for these now albinos or now white people to make their way down into to Africa. So you got to understand, and I don't want to use the term albinos yet because that's basically like a trait of this mutation. Albinism and vitiligo is a trait of this mutation, still proving that the mutation occurred. So you had these now white people come down into Africa, basically explain what the hell happened. There may have been black people that still survived, that still, was black. And reason being is because even if the mutation occurred and a person was born white, if they married or mated with another black person and had a baby, chances are that baby would have came out, of course, darker. And then if that baby married back into African family again, you basically breed out the mutation, but the gene is still in you. So somewhere down the line, you could produce an albino or you could produce a white baby, but the albino basically would be produced because you basically diluted the mutation, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Basically kind of overrode it, but it's still there. So this is basically what took place. They came down, they breeded back in with Africans, and you had over time, them just basically breed out the white person. And you had those Africans that came down to Africa stay, but you had a lot of the white people up in the north stay in the north because, one, they probably felt like they wouldn't be accepted, or two, they probably felt like that was home. That's where they wanted to be. They didn't want to go down there. And a lot of them stayed. And if you think about over time, hundreds of years passing of just white people up there, breeding. I mean, even over the thousands of years when they was trapped in the ice age, they breeded out, so to speak, the African gene, the blackness. They breeded it out to where if you, of course, two whites can only make a white. So if you only mating with white people, I mean, after hundreds of years of mating, I mean, it's just going to be white. And that's basically what took place. So you had the breeding happen in the north with the white people up there. And then you had down in Africa and other places where they basically bred back in or bred with other races, either with the people in India or China, what have you, and bred into these different races of people. And of course, you had still over time, white people coming down from the north, trickling into northern Africa and Europe and different places and blended in. And it was an understanding then of who they were, where they came from, and the fact that, you know, these were basically African people at one point. Something happened to them. So it was an understanding of that. They knew that. And the reason why we know they knew that, because you got to think about it. If they didn't understand that these white people came from African people, it would have been a problem. It would have been wars long ago. So you got to think about that. You got to think about, for thousands of years, it's just been black people. Then all of a sudden, all these white people come out of nowhere. What do you think they would think? You know, they would probably like, who the hell is these people? And they obviously could communicate with the Africans because they knew the language and it was passing it down. And of course, language changed over time, but they still, you know, kept some form of the language or some form of communication with the Africans, so they could communicate when they came back down after the Ice Age. So, you know, they can explain, you know, that they was trapped. There was no way for them to get down there, and that people been up there for thousands of years. So something like this must have occurred. And, you know, all the researchers is basically saying the same exact thing when you do the research, that this must have happened. So you got to understand, this is basically how it began, you know, for white people. This is where it came from. This is why it seems like in history, they just came out of nowhere, because it's basically what happened. There was African people that mutated into whites and started coming down into the rest of the civilizations throughout the world, and they needed to catch up. There was so much information that was conveyed throughout different civilizations that they had no clue of. They didn't understand so much. And then you have to understand that, one, you know, for thousands of years, they was fighting the elements. They was fighting animals. They was fighting, warring with other people to survive. They was fighting, scratching, clawing to survive up in the north against the elements, against the animals, against so much. Meanwhile, you know, in Africa, everything was a little bit easier because they had knowledge, and they was able to use their intelligence to do things and make things a lot more easier for the civilizations. Not to mention, one, it was spiritual. Everybody, it was, you know, people were spiritual. It was into spirituality. It wasn't so much about material, whereas with these white people, everything was about material. It was about food. It was about what you had. They had no concept of spirituality, and they couldn't relate to the African people. They just couldn't relate to what was going on. So, of course, over time, something might have happened. Something must have happened. You had some whites who decided to come down from the north and be a part of civilizations that had schools and structures and to understand and to learn. At some point, a plan was hatched. A plan was put into effect to basically take over. And we don't know who started the plan or what have you, but from every bit of research that I've done, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand that the elite or the top of whoever was in this group of white people who decided to set this plan in motion, they came up with a plan to basically take over. There's just no way to get around that. But a plan was hatched, and, you know, a lot of the people was involved in it. And their job was basically to go in and to mix in with the races, as I talked about in the Buddhism DVD. And they had people that was women who was just there to breed armies, to just have babies and to make as many white people as possible to grow their numbers against, you know, the Africans in Europe and in Africa. So that was the plan. So, you know, one of the things I do want you to understand is, you know, you got to realize that it's more to it than just, you know, white people coming down and taking over the lands from African people. And, you know, it's just not how it happened, because one, you still had a lot of white people that was married to black people back then, believe it or not, that was in these civilizations of African people in Kemet and in Africa, in Northern Africa, Libya, believe it or not. And, you know, of course, eventually in Greece or what have you, but they wasn't all in on this plan. And that's, I know a lot of people don't want to accept that, but it's the truth. Now, you got to know what really happened. And a lot of you not going to like it. I don't like it, but it's the facts. It's the truth. So, you know, this basically brings me into the Moors, and, you know, where the Moors start to come into play. We're going to come back to the Europeans because it's all going to come together and fit. But you need to understand that part of history first. It's basically how it happened. At some point, they start coming down into the north and blended in. And then once their armies was big enough and trained, because they were masters at fighting, they've been fighting, throughout their civilization's time. Once they had an army large enough, they started hatching a plan out. And it's basically, what happened. So now with the Moors, and, let me just basically start off by saying this. If it wasn't for the Moors, the Europeans wouldn't be in power today. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. I wish it wasn't true, but it's the truth. If anybody got any kind of hopes that the Moors was, these good people, they was. But you're going to find out what I mean by that, what's really going on, because it's different Moors, and we'll get into that. But bottom line, if it wasn't for the Moors, the Europeans would not be ruling. If it wasn't for the Moors, Africans wouldn't have been enslaved by the Arabs, wouldn't have been enslaved by the Europeans. The Moors was traitors. There's just no way around that. And I wish it was any other way to put it, but that's the truth. But you got to understand what Moors. Now, it's a lot of confusion and deception surrounding the Moors, and it's the reason why. Now, Moor means black. Just no way around that. They're going to try to tell you when you look up Moor that Moors were Arab Muslims. Bullshit. They was black. Moor has always meant black. That's basically how they pertain to a learned African. That name was given to the Africans by Greeks, by Romans. Moor means black. And a Moor to the Romans and Greeks was basically a smart African. Plain and simple. An African that had knowledge in math, astrology, science, building, and what have you. They were called Moors. Just a black person that was smart and that was learned. And the only reason why they try to couple it with the Arab Muslims is to establish a faulty timeline. To establish a faulty timeline so they could try to say that the Moors basically began with Islam, when Moors existed long before Islam. So you got to understand that. This is how they're basically trying to steal the North, as we're going to talk about. They're trying to steal North Africa. They're trying to make it as if Africans never stepped foot in North Africa, which is retarded. And you actually have, people who believe that Africans never existed in North Africa. And I just tell you how, scrambled a lot of people's brains are. You have a lot of, Italian, Spanish, Greek words that's pertaining to the Moors, that's pertaining to either darkness or black. You have Moorish, you have Moraz, you have Mora. You have a lot of words that means darkness or brunette, or has some kind of a word pertaining to black people. So you find these words all throughout the ancient world. We know about mulatto, when a black person mixes. All this pertains to the Moors. This is just how we can, just put in all this information in the direction of Moors being black Africans and not Muslims. It's just that simple. Were there Moorish Muslims? Of course, but this was later. And these are the traitors. These are the ones that I'm talking about that traded. Before Islam, you had Moors who was just basically throughout Africa, who were smart, who were scientists, mathematicians, astrologers, what have you, who had knowledge that was teaching the Europeans, that was teaching the Persians that came in, or whoever came in and got information. Africa was the hub. It's just that simple. Africa was the hub. Everybody was coming into Africa during that time, and it was learning, of course, from African people. So you had some African people that had the knowledge and some didn't. Some regular Africans that was just, either growing up or just working. And you had the Moors. You had people who just knew and had this knowledge. These was the Moors. And long before these people who traded on us, you had already the established civilizations of smart African people who was referred to as Moors. There's just no way around it. So again, they're trying to interject Islam in there because this is the time where the Moors was on the side of the Europeans when they traded. And this is where they want this to stick out in history so you can basically separate the two. And you should separate the two, but you can't separate the fact that Moors mean black. Moor is black. And not all Moors was traders like these guys. So again, when I say, Moors was traders, of course, the Moors that was before the traders are gone. They've done away. These traders still exist. They're still out there. And any Moor that you see that's practicing Islam is a trader. Any Moor you see with that fez or that turban on their head is a traitor. It's just no way around that. So the Moors could have been anybody. They could have been anybody that was a professor, a teacher, mathematician, scientist, builder, anybody that had knowledge, that was learned, that was different from the rest of the Africans. So this is basically what the Greeks and Romans called them. You got to think about it when you come into a different civilization. In your language, you have a different name for the people. It's just something different that you call them, from what they call themselves. We don't know what they really called themselves, but to the Greeks and Romans, they was called the Moors. Now, supposedly, you get the name Moors from Mauritania, or Mauritania, however you want to pronounce it. But Mauritania is basically the northern part of Morocco, stretching over to the northern part of Algeria. So these people was called the Morai by the Greeks, and the Romans called them the same thing, basically meaning black, another one of those M words. So you have Mauritania. This is where you supposedly had these black people coming from. The natives there was black. And this is supposedly where the word Moor derives from. So again, you have so many different things, M words, pertaining to Moors. I mean, it's just so easy. You find them all over the place when you start doing the research. You see them, so many different words that's pertaining to black or darkness or brunette, that begins with an M. So it's not a coincidence, So then you have Saint Maurice. Saint Maurice, who was basically the patron saint of France, Switzerland. He basically was the leader of the Roman Theban Legion in the 3rd century AD, which the 3rd century, again, before Islam. So again, Maurice is another Moorish name. This dude picture is everywhere and he is black. They don't change that because there's too much information that supports this dude being, a black, a Catholic. So again, some stuff they just can't hide because there's too much proof out there. And it's because they can't hide these things. It's how we're able to piece together, these things, history, put the pieces together. Again, I don't just go by what the books say because the books lie or the books don't have the information correct. You got to be a critical researcher and look at things and say, this don't fit. Because a lot of times it just don't fit. And when you try to make it fit, history is out of whack and it don't work. So you got to look at stuff and say, something is not right. But the reason why we have this confusion is, again, because they are trying to steal Northern Africa. There's a lot of people who just don't want to give Africans credit for this knowledge. So by saying that they was Arabs, the Moors, when you start doing the research and seeing all the stuff that the Moors did, you would say, well, the Arabs were smart. Not understanding that it was the Moors. Plain and simple. So you have a lot of deception going on there to where they just don't want to give us credit and they just don't want to say that the Moors was black. Plain and simple. Now we have Procopus, right? Procopus was a Byzantine scholar, back in the 6th century AD. He died, I believe, 565 AD, again, before Islam. Really important. Now, he wrote in his book, History of War, volume 4, page 323, talking about the Moors. He says, but desert land, extending to a great distance, and that beyond that, there are men, not black-skinned like the Moors, but very white in body and fair-haired. Now, this is from a Byzantine scholar in the 6th century before Islam. So again, we can already establish from research that there's so many mentions of the Moors being black long before Islam. So when you Google the Moors and you see this whole Muslim, definition, we know that that's bogus, that's bullshit. So that's the end of the debate right there. No more debating who the Moors was. Too much proof out there that says 100% clearly that the Moors were black, that they were Africans. They was black people. They were not Muslims. You had the term Moors, and you had Moors being around long before Islam. They think you're stupid. They don't expect you to do any extensive research and to dig deeper into this. And mainly this deception is for Europeans who automatically going to read the stuff and not even look into it, because as long as some of these racist people can say that, oh, well, they wasn't black and keep it moving, that's fine with them. They're willing to deal with that. It's so much racism and hatred towards African people for reasons I will explain that they don't want to give us no kind of credit. But the proof is out there from their own European scholars that the Moors was no doubt black Africans, and that's just a given. So don't even debate with these racist people. Let them go and do what they want to do. Understand, Europe, plain and simple, was ruled by African people. I'm talking France, Germany, Italy, Spain. I mean, all these places was ruled by African people, ruled by black people, period. What we call Europe was ruled by black people. They know it. The proof is out there. Again, there's this line that you come across when you start doing research into history. And below that line is very scarce information. Above that line, you can't establish a legitimate reason to give Europe to Europeans. You can't establish their legitimacy to Europe. You can't. It's in pieces as far as our history, but their history and what they want to put out there is plain to see, but it's all lies. And they still don't really give them Europe as legitimately theirs, their conquerors. It's just that simple. That's already proven. So when you start doing the research, basically, what happened in Europe, what caused the Dark Ages. So again, you had Africans ruling Europe, and they were sophisticated. They had systems in place that worked. And you got to understand, when you take away people that's controlling such a sophisticated system, and you put in place people who have absolutely no knowledge on how these systems should be ran and worked, there's going to be problems. So that's basically what happened. Now, the number one reason they give for the Dark Ages, if you look it up and do the research, they'll tell you that, the reason why the Dark Ages happened is because Rome fell. The fall of Rome caused the Dark Ages. Now, the thing is, the fall of Rome was the rise of Rome. The fall of Rome, the fall of Europe, what brought about the Dark Ages was the rise of Rome and the rise of European powers, plain and simple. There's just no way around it. It was the rise, because you have to think about, one, how could Rome be fallen? And you got to look at the timeline again for the Dark Ages between 500 AD and 1000 AD. This is supposed to be the time span or the time frame of the Dark Ages. But when you look at between this time of what was going on in Rome, first of all, one, how could Rome fall into a dark age? How could the Dark Ages be caused because Rome fell, when during that time you had Rome fighting the long war between them, the Persians, and the Arabs? So if they fell during the 5th century AD or during the 6th century AD and all the way up to when they came out into the Renaissance, how could they be fighting these wars? How could they be establishing so much power and setting up so many civilizations if they fell? Rome never fell. What fell was the African control of Rome and the rise of the European control of Rome. So it wasn't that Rome fell in the sense to where all Rome was done. It was the African rulership of Rome fell. It's just that simple. Because one, you have, how can you have a war from 92 BCE up until the 7th century AD that ends in the status quo antebellum, as I keep talking about, the war with the Persians and the Arabs? Remember, they was fighting this war for hundreds of years. There's no way that Rome could fall and they still be able to fight this long war. Now, one of the things you got to realize is a lot of these countries was mixed race. You had, of course, as I was talking about in the beginning of the video, about how, white people started coming down. The Aryans started coming down. So you had the Aryans start coming down. I talked about this too in Buddhism DVD. The Aryans started coming down and mixing in. And the thing was, they was in Rome, they was mixing in a lot with the black rulers. They was rising in positions of power. That was the goal. So now when you get up to the point of Christianity, when Christianity comes into play and you have the Catholic Church starting the whole Roman church and everything beginning in the 1st century AD, when all that was coming about, that was controlled by both black and white people. This is why when you have a lot of the Hebrew Israelites and a lot of Christians, when they want to say that the Bible is black and it's black, because when you go back and look at the research in Rome, you'll see that you have both control of Christianity under African powers and under European powers or white powers, both black and white people. But make no mistake, Rome was ruled by black people. It's just that simple. Rome was ruled by them. The black people was ruling, and they went hand in hand. So this is why it's that confusion there. But really, This was, of course, the Roman Greek creation that they put in place and had basically, I guess, convinced the black leadership that this was the way to go. But it was both of them that basically was controlling the Roman Catholic Church during the first century. This is why you hear the rumors about the first pope being black, and people believe that Pope Victor I was black. He's supposed to be from the African section of Rome or what have you. So it's a lot of information that tells you that Rome during this period was both black and white, and that's what all the research shows you. But it was ruled by many African kings and African rulers. So you have this establishment of Christianity under both powers, which made it easier for them to basically get black people to come into Christianity during that time. But it was basically a big double cross. So you had the Africans thinking that everything was cool, that they were working together with these white people and everything going well. And then it was basically like Star Wars, everything going cool, they're working together. And then, the top power structure says execute Order 66. And when you had the stormtroopers basically turn on the Jedi, and that's basically what happened. Unbeknownst to them, at some point, they turned on them. They basically turned on them, and basically was civil war, in Rome. And what that basically was the European powers or the Aryan powers basically taking control of Rome from the African people. Now, history will tell you, when you look this up, when you look at this time frame, it will tell you straight out that the barbarians was the one who basically came into Rome and took over Rome, and conquered Rome and took it from the Romans. Now, as a matter of fact, if you look that up, and you see it says here in 476 CE, Romulus, the last of the Roman emperors in the West, was overthrown by the Germanic leader Odoacer, who became the first barbarian to rule in Rome. So, Rome had basically been established under Roman rulership for, 1,000 years, it's saying. So you got to understand, and this is where critical thinking comes in, and you got to think about this. One, of course, the barbarians was white. The barbarians was Aryans. And when you got to understand, one, they was bred specifically for this reason, to conquer. They was bred to conquer. When you look at barbarians, they huge. They was bred for war, plain and simple. So one, you got to ask yourself, when the Romans fell, when the barbarians came in and took over Rome, why would they keep the name Rome? They kept the name. So you got to think about, one, usually when somebody conquers a land, they change the name immediately. There's no proof. There's no information that says that the barbarians came in and took the name. Two, if the barbarians came into Rome, and we all seen the barbarians, these big stupid brutes, if they came in and took over Rome, how did the Catholic Church survive? Plain and simple. So you got to think about, one, the name not changing. And we know the name Rome, it comes from Romulus and Remus. So remember, Romulus supposed to have killed his brother Remus and basically established Rome and named it after himself. This is like supposedly Greek mythology and what have you, what pertains to Rome. And this was like in the 8th century BCE. So, Rome been around for a long time. But of course, African people was there long before that. Again, history is written by the conquerors, not the conquered. So one, again, the name wasn't changed. Two, Rome stayed in power. How did Rome stay in power? How did the Catholic Church stay in power, I should say? The Pope. The papacy still was gone. Papacy still was ruling. Why would they allow that if these barbarians just came out of nowhere and took over? So that's basically critical thinking right there. You got to really think about that. Name wasn't changed. You have the papacy continuing and basically still taxing, still basically doing what they was doing. And when you pay attention, it was the church that was basically ruling. So if you overthrow in Rome, you overthrow in the church. It's just that simple. But again, it wasn't the overthrowing of, Rome. It wasn't, the Romans being kicked out and these barbarians basically establishing this new rulership. It was the taking of Rome away from African people. It's just that simple. And again, there's no way that this could have been going on when they fighting this whole war with the barbarians, that at the same time they still fighting this war with the Persians and Arabs. It's all suspect, all leading up into Islam. So you got to really think about that. So basically what happened was when the barbarians was taking over, when the Romans was taking over Rome from the Africans, you had the Africans basically flee. Same thing in Europe. You had the barbarians, you had the Aryans coming down, and it basically was execute Order 66. Like I said, kill all the Jedi. Kill all the black folks, get them out of there. Any black people that remained was enslaved. It's just that simple. But, they was overthrown, and there was a lot of treaties made to where, okay, we'll keep you in power, because they still had to control the people. All the people ain't flee. They still had to control Europe. They still had to control these parts of Europe. So in a lot of cases, these black leaders stayed in power, and they had to marry somebody, a white woman onto the throne. This happened in a lot of cases where they married with one of the barbarian women, or let's just say the Aryan women, and then they assumed the throne, gave birth to an heir, and so on and so forth, or they were just killed outright and enslaved. It depends on where you go look at. But this is basically what happened. During this time, the Dark Ages was basically about Rome, Europe, that whole area all around there, being taken away from African powers and put into the hands of the Aryans. It's just that simple. So with the Dark Ages and the plagues and everything that happened like that again, you go from the learned Africans, the black people who had this knowledge, who understood about sanitation, hygiene. They understood about the system, the sewer system, or what have you. Then you had millions of white people flooding in to Europe, at the conquest. And they was bunched up. They didn't know how to work the system. They didn't know about hygiene. They didn't know about viruses and bacteria, what have you. So them flooding to so many different areas and being overcrowded with so many dead bodies laying around or what have you, this is how the plague was created. So the Black Plague, they want to call it. This is how it was created, with so much, unsanitary, horrible conditions in Europe. Plague was created and killed off millions of people. It's true fact. Now, also, when you do a lot of research, even Procopius, him and a lot of other researchers said that it was 2 volcano eruptions during that time, to where the sun was basically blocked out, it was blacked out, which is why they call it the Dark Ages, because for a long time, the sun was darkened, and supposedly it was a mini ice age during that time as well. So it's weird. It's a lot of stuff that was going on around that time. But despite any of that, what really was going on was the leadership, the African leadership of Europe was usurped, was, stolen, taken away from the hands of black people and put in the hands of the Europeans. And that's basically what happened during the Dark Ages. And that's what happened. Plain and simple. I don't care who says what and how they want to slice it. When you do the research, that's what happened. This is where that line is drawn, because then everything under that starts to get sketchy. We have this clear picture of history after that, but below that is what happened. Just all of a sudden you find these Europeans in power. Then you got to ask yourself the question, well, wait a minute. We can prove that Africa was in Europe first. We know that Africans was on the planet first, that we was everywhere. And, how did it go from these countries, these sections of land, just no black people? So a lot of the black people were smart and they flooded to Africa, or they was enslaved, and they set up civilizations elsewhere. So you got to really pay attention and use critical thinking, and don't just read in the books and follow what it's saying. Think. You got to be like a detective on a lot of this research, because stuff just don't fit. It doesn't fit, and when it don't fit, you gotta keep digging. So during the rise of Rome, the same time Rome is trying to basically hatch their plan. At the same time, you had the Arabs doing the same thing. Remember, the Arabs went into Egypt and took it away from the Romans, but they both had basically the same plan to basically overthrow the Africans and take the power away from the Africans, because of course they really couldn't understand the spirituality of the African people, because they were so materialistic. So now with the Arabs on the rise and a major threat to Roman power, of course a deal was struck. So when I talk about the whole war between the Persians, the Arabs, and the Romans that ended in the status quo antebellum, as I explained before, that's bullshit. A deal was struck. Now, it wasn't just between the Romans and the Arabs, but the Moors, as you probably have guessed by now, was in on this deal. The reason why I didn't explain it before is because I wanted to save it, of course, for this video. But the Moors was in on it, plain and simple, and they established Islam. This is what all the facts, and I'm proving my point in the video, of course, but this is what all the information tells us. There is no way. Rome ain't stupid. Rome is not dumb. There's no way they could conquer into Europe without the help of the Moors. They just couldn't do it. They couldn't even set foot into certain lands if they established war with these Africans first. Everybody would be on the lookout for these Europeans. The Europeans basically had to keep the whole cloak of secrecy up, especially pertaining to the Catholic Church. So that was their go-between. The Catholic Church, Rome, couldn't be sending soldiers out there to do what they was doing. And I talked about this in previous videos. So the Arabs was basically used, along with the Moors, to go into these territories and take these territories for Rome. Some of the places they got to keep for themselves and conquer. But it was a deal that was basically struck between the two, between the three, I should say. So you got to understand, they knew the Moors were smart. They had this information. There's no way they could not utilize them. They couldn't just kill them. That would be like going into a bank, robbing a bank, and trying to rob a bank, but you kill a bank manager. The only person who got the goddamn combination to the vault, you kill. Yeah, you in there with a bunch of money. It's possible to get it, but it'd be a lot easier if you had the bank manager to just open the door. So they understood that with the Moors. So they understood that they needed these people who had this information, and they basically was paying them to fight. Now you'll read during your research when you go in and fact check what I'm talking about. During your research, you'll see a lot of scholars talking about the Moors for hire, and Moors being hired by the Romans to fight in the wars. But one of the things you got to think about is you have civilization around you crumbling, people falling to these barbarians, to these Romans, and to the Arabs too, who was going in and enslaving and conquering as well. So you had the Moors with this knowledge, these people, and we don't know if it was like a group of Moors that just came together and said, hey, this is what we offer in exchange for money or what have you, because we see that you're going to be leading right now, or what it was. What made them trade, we don't know. And one of the things I want to establish in this video, in this DVD, for you guys to really understand, to get, I know it's going to be hard, but you got to understand how much we have traded on each other, how much we have stabbed each other in the back and did our own people dirty throughout history. Plain and simple. And again, I wish it was any other way to put that, or I wish it was a lie. It's just not a lie. It's the truth. We really did our own people dirty in so many different ways, and we still continue to do so. So, the Africans sellouts. They sell out fast, real quick, real easy. And it's something that they know. And this is basically what happened with the Moors. They sold us out. Plain and simple. They sold us out. So once they had the Moors on board, of course, the first place they went for was Spain. They went to the Iberian Peninsula. That was one of the first lands that they wanted to go and basically conquer and take. Now, you got to understand, one, you had Africans already ruling in Spain long before 711 AD, which is when the Muslims come into Spain and basically take it over, and they say the Moors came into, the Arab Muslims, Moors came into Spain and took it over in 711 AD, but they took it from Africans. Africans had already been there. They had already been kings, a bunch of kings that was ruling in Spain, for over 100 years before, the Moors and the Muslims came into Spain. So understand that. So, they came into Spain, and another reason why we know it's the Moors that's separate from the Muslims that build the amazing things in Spain is because, one, when you look at these castles, it's amazing. When you look at the Alhambra in Spain, the castle built in, I believe, 889 AD by the Moors. So we're talking about this amazing castle. It's huge, it's big, there's so much math that's in there, built by Moors. Now, if the Moors were Arabs and not Africans, find me in the Arab world before this time where the Arabs built something, comparable, comparable to this castle. They just didn't do it. And, and a little bit after that, they built the cathedral. They started to build the mosque, but the cathedral ended up being built because, they was basically conquered before they could finish building the castle and the cathedral. But the one that I showed you guys in Mallorca, the Cathedral of Santa Maria, built by the Moors, basically taken over. And then you have the cathedral now that was later built, of course, by the Romans. So understand, again, 711 AD. We're talking about a little over 100 years after Islam was established, that you have the Moors coming in to Spain and basically taking it away from African rulership. All around the time, this is the Dark Ages now, during this time when basically all of Europe was being taken away from African rulers. It just so happens that we can document this case, but best believe if you look around Europe hard enough, you'll find in other cases where kings was overthrown by the European powers, by Rome, by these barbarians, by these Aryans, and basically, enslaved and booted out of power. This is a case where we can actually pinpoint it where the Moors came in and or the Muslims came in and basically took it. So think about that. Just think about that fact. The simple fact that the kingdom that they took out of Spain, that they overthrew, was an African kingdom. So this is why they try to hide it, because then you would ask that question, well, it's black on black crime, what's going on? If the Moors was black, what is Moors going into Spain and taking it away from other black people? What's happening? And one, they don't want, the main reason why they're going try to cover it up and make it so that the Moors was Muslim is because that palace is where they still reside. The palace is still there. They basically destroyed all other proof that the Moors was basically ruling in there. I mean, the major proof that they was black and everything like that. And the fact that we was there long before that, they destroyed a lot of the proof. And the castle, they basically couldn't destroy because it's amazing, as you can see. It was a beautiful castle. So the Alhambra Castle, they kept it going and they basically stripped it of anything that was Moorish or Muslim. But, it was ran by African people. And then the Moors came in and took it, and along with the Muslims. And this is the proof that we have to show that this is what was going on, because they was doing this for Rome. Now understand, they ruled Spain for hundreds of years before Rome basically got everything together and basically said, hey, get the fuck out of here. And you have Rome basically come in there and take Spain away from the Muslims. And you had Rome put Ferdinand and Isabella on the throne, and they basically outlawed Judaism and Islam. And and they basically ruled. And that's basically what was going on. So Rome eventually, when you pay attention to a lot of these territories that was taken over, first by the Arabs, and then all of a sudden by Rome. I mean, think about that. I mean, that's basically what took place. You see that, some of the places was kept for the Arabs, but most of the places went to the Roman Empire. And that was the deal. And I believe, the Saudis may be the descendants of those people. They kings. Everybody else in the Muslim world getting treated like shit, bombings, explosions, what have you. But the Saudis is living like kings. They are kings. They call them kings, royal family. Think about that. That's kind of weird, when you think about the Pope always visiting the Saudi royal family and this and that, Saudi, see the Bushes kissing them, what have you. Put it all together. Their bloodline goes back to these Muslims, and they established this whole deception along with the papacy, which is why they both in power. So you had Rome basically come in and take the whole northern part of Africa. Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. So where you have Alexandria, Egypt, still white people there to this day. All these people are Roman people. This is why when you go to Morocco and stuff like that, Algeria, you see the white skin looking people, they look white. And you say, well, this is Africa. What is these white people doing in there? They are mixed with Roman. They are a mix of Romans, Africans, and Arabs, plain and simple. And these people are so ignorant. I can't even describe some of the stuff I've read from Moroccan people about African people, because they are ignorant of their history. And they don't understand. They think that, Morocco was theirs and it never belonged to African people, ignorant of the facts. That, Africans was there long before them, and they are Roman of Roman blood. Same thing in Spain. So you go to Spain and you say, well, Spain, but they're basically white people that speak Spanish. What is that? They're Romans. Understand the history. Romans, that's all they are. So when you understand, Spanish is one of the Romance languages, or Romanance languages, however you want to pronounce it. You got Spanish, you have French, You have Italian, of course, or Latin or what have you. And, you know, the Romans speak Latin. What do we call these people? We call them Latinos. Plain and simple. Put it together. It's not no coincidence. They're the same people. You look at Puerto Ricans, they speak Spanish, just like in Spain. Spanish. It all goes together. So you got to understand what took place in the world and why certain people are in certain parts of the world, because they are of Roman blood and they conquered their way into these territories that was once African. So when you start putting all the pieces together, you can see why certain people are in certain places. Now, to play fair, you still had Romans. Romans did exist in Spain before then. If you go back, you had Romans in Spain in the 3rd century BCE. When it was called the Hispania. This is where you get, the Hispanics. Hispanics. Hispania is what they call the Iberian Peninsula. So it all ties in together. So you do have a history of Romans in Spain, 3rd century BCE, long before then. But of course, African people was there before that. Also, you have Romans that was in Liberia. Same time. So you got to understand, again, as I said, when you go back and look, even the Egyptians show you themselves that citizens of Egypt, some of them was white. When you go back during that history, 3rd century BCE, you had Romans, remember, Rome, 8th century or 7th century BCE established. So you still have Romans around that time. But you had them in Spain with the Africans, and they had took some of that land that the Africans, of course, took back. It wasn't like a war, but it was just like they came into a space that wasn't theirs, but the Africans let them stay. Same thing in Libya when they came into Libya, and they coexisted for hundreds of years. It's just that simple. They coexisted for hundreds of years. So when you're looking at the Egyptians talking about white people being citizens of Egypt, that's why they was coming into Egypt. They was learning. When the Romans admit themselves that they was coming into Egypt and learning, they're not talking about they came all the way from Rome. They was already there. They was in Spain. They was in Libya, which is right next to Egypt. And they was coming in. They was coexisting with the Africans for a while. And this is how they, the Africans was teaching them and they was learning and what have you. There was no problems at that time until whoever, at the top had aspirations for, domination. And they wanted to take over. But this is what was going on. So Spain was called Hispania, as I said, which was the name for the Iberian Peninsula, and it was in there. This is where you get Hispanics. I mean, it all ties in. I get a lot of questions from Spanish-speaking people, Hispanics, and what have you, that want to understand about their history. A lot of them know it, and they don't want to associate themselves with white people, but you got to understand that's what they is. They're basically of Roman descent. You can't get around it. Most of the people that it's, first of all, the Aryans come down and settling in Germany, which we was there first, of course, and Kings was there, what have you. Same thing all throughout Northern Africa into Europe. You have these Aryans setting up, as I said. But, a lot of Hispanics want to know, where they come from. You come from Spain, ancient people, going back to, long time ago, of course, but establishing civilizations a long time ago, and they have history. So what you got to understand, one is, after the overthrow happened and the war started breaking out, it was a mindset of, domination to basically clear out what was the Africans. They basically raided the shit and took it from them. So it's like if you're going to break into somebody's house and take it from them, you want to get rid of their pictures on the wall. You want to get rid of clear their browser history, the stuff that they like. You want to put all your stuff in there now. And then now, if one of their relatives was to walk into the house, they won't recognize it. It's like, well, damn, I know my people lived here, but I don't see no traces of them. So that's basically what happened. So when you have with the Latinos, you have with Hispanics or what have you, this is your origin, plain and simple. When you look into Morocco, you look at Algeria, when you look at these people, Belgium and what have you, these people are from the Roman Empire, plain and simple, which is the Aryans. So all this history comes together when you understand it, and when you start looking around the world and piecing things and putting people in a proper place and understanding where they came from prior. So one of the things Louis Farrakhan said was, when he was on, I forget what show, I think it was Phil Donahue, when he said if somebody was to tell you to go back to where you came from, you wouldn't have no place to go. You wouldn't have no, because it was already occupied, plain and simple. It's just a fact of history that Europeans need to understand. It's a fact, whether you like it or not. them being in a position of power right now and ruling and dominating, there's a lot of arrogance that surrounds a lot of white people that they don't want to let go. Some of them understand history and the truth, and they want to be on the side of good. They have good morals. They're good people, and they want to just know what the hell is going on because they have been lied to their entire lives. You get some white people who don't even want to just fathom the fact that everything you knew about your history is a lie. And these people have been lying to you to keep something from you that I'm going to explain in this video. There's something that's really important. And it's the basis for all of this domination that I'm going to tell you. But when looking at history, you got to put the pieces together and make it fit. Everything that I explained to you guys so far in this video, it fits. It's all history stuff. You can all go back and look up yourself and you'll see how it fits in understanding. And one of the major things for African people, black people, is, you got to understand who the Moors is and how their role was a major part in European domination. So going back and backtracking a little bit again, going back into 711 AD, understanding around this time, as I said, this is the Dark Ages. This is around the time when all the black rulers was falling and the European powers was taking over with the help of the Arabs and the Moors. So understand that. So again, they went into Spain and took over. Again, this is where the confusion takes place because the documented cases of the Muslims taking over Spain, the name Moor comes up and it's associated with the Muslims. You got to understand that. Another thing you got to understand is what was taking place, what naturally would take place when you have these, different peoples coming together, different civilizations. The Arabs was mixing with the Moors. It's just that simple. It's common sense that would happen. They was mixing with the Moors, and it's where you start getting that name Berber or Berber. And a Berber or Berber is basically what the Arabs call an African and an Arab mixed. But it wasn't just them that was mixing. You had the Africans mixing with the Arabs and the Africans mixing with the barbarians or the Aryans, the Arabs mixing with them, and it just was a mix. But that's what they was calling them. They was calling them Berbers or Berbers. When you start seeing that name, it's a confusion, as I said, because you have different scholars who put that term into different contexts. And then when you look at what the Africans called them, when the Africans called the Berbers, they called them colonists. They called them conquerors. And a lot of scholars, mistake them for just being European. So you look at a lot of scholars when they first was doing research. A lot of the old books I was reading on this, a lot of the scholars thought that the Berbers was Europeans because the Africans was calling them conquerors, colonists, colonizers, or what have you. But there was really a mix of the Arabs and the Africans or the Moors mixing and coming into these lands and taking over, which is another reason why they say that the Moors was Arabs, because they was mixed with the Arabs. But of course, if you're a researcher, when you put out this kind of information, you see clearly that the Moors was African. And the reason why that Berber or the Moors being Muslim is put on the forefront is because if you don't do that, then you have to admit that before the European powers was at the height of their power, Africans built something as amazing as the Alhambra Castle, which we did. We built something as amazing as St. Maria, the cathedral in Mallorca, Spain. So they don't want to admit that because they have to admit a lot more stuff if they admit that. So understand, again, 711. This is probably, almost 100 years. Over 100 years before, after the Arab slave trade began. So you got to think about that. So you have one complete fact. You have these Moors, black people, with Arabs conquering African territories, enslaving Africans. Documented, no way around that. So again, wouldn't have the Arab slave trade if it wasn't for the Moors. The Moors had to be in on that to get the Arabs into the Africans into certain territories, or to get into certain African territories. They needed these Moors to infiltrate and to get in there. This is how it was done. Again, I don't know why they did it. I don't know what they was promised, what happened, but they deceived us. They stabbed us in the back. The Moors throughout history, as you will see in this video, have done nothing but trade and destroy Africa, destroy the foundation that we built for thousands of years. When you see that turban, when you see that fez, that's a Moor. They are traitors. Plain and simple. They was monkeys. That's why you see the little monkey with the little fez on his head. Don't even realize that they call them damn Moors monkeys, because that's what they was. When you look at the pictures of these Moors, because they have a lot of pictures throughout history. You can't hide this stuff. Let's go back and look at the pictures of the Arab slave trade. When you just Google the pictures and look at them. Look at the turbans. Look at the skin color of these people. Black people. Now, again, you got to understand, one, I know a lot of people know about this already, but the Muslims and Moors enslaved a lot of white women. You had a lot of civilizations that was pro-black, so to speak, where it was a lot of mixed civilizations. And the white women was put into sex trafficking or sex trades, where there was basically, sex slaves, plain and simple. And this is documented. There's so much documentation of that. So, during this time when you had the Moors and the Arabs basically on a tear, conquering everything for the Romans, white people were enslaved as well as black people during the time, during the Arab slave trade. Documented fact, plain and simple. So when you're doing your research, you will find it. You will hear a lot of white people bring that up too. They're quick to bring that up. We was enslaved too, but yeah, y'all was enslaved to the Arabs. It wasn't really, it's not so many Moors that was, with these Arabs. It was mostly, Arab armies and mixed in with some Moors. But, make no mistake, it still was a lot of them that betrayed us. So you had so much conquering going on during the Dark Ages, which to me the name is rightfully given so, the Dark Ages, because there was so much death and war around that time that was going on. But what people need to understand, this was Rome. Still is Rome to this day. They have never lost power. They have always been in power and still is in power to this day. Plain and simple. Always point out that fact. Roman soldier on American Express card, that should tell you something. The Pope goes and visit everybody. Every ruler you think of or leader who was supposedly under this, Illuminati thing, this New World Order umbrella, the Pope goes and visit. If the Pope coming to see you, yeah, they own you. It's just that simple. And, it's so much history into that I'm going to get into in a later video to where this all stemming from. But it's wrong. It's always been wrong. And a lot of people need to understand that when you go back in history, if you do the actual research, because it's painstaking, it takes time. When you do it and you read through these books, it's just right there in front of your face. They can't hide it. They can't hide it, plain and simple. So it's been wrong. So yeah, eventually the Moors will go into the rest of Europe and basically teach these rulers and teach the people how to basically run things, and how to basically set up schools or what have you, and then bring everything into the Renaissance period where everything was just flourishing. Things started to calm down. The art started to be more seen and more heard. More people would start to express creativity due to the years of teaching and knowledge that they had gained up until that point. So this is where you have a renaissance, because what's happening here? What happens when you start to teach people something new? They start to use that knowledge, and to them that knowledge is new. Just think about this time period. Just all of a sudden you start getting these works of art never seen before. Go back and look at history. Now, if Europeans possessed this kind of talent, where was it? Where was it before the Dark Ages? Where was this stuff? You don't see it. But think about, you had this Renaissance period. After the Moors came in and taught all the information, you start seeing, Michelangelo's, and, you start seeing a lot of Europeans basically coming up with so many new things. You start seeing Michelangelo, you start seeing Da Vinci's, and you start seeing so many different Romans and Greeks and Europeans just coming up with so many unbelievable things, because now they had the knowledge. So this is where you start to put all this stuff together, and you start to see that, wow, right around this time, right after the Dark Ages started to end and started coming to the Renaissance, it was a wealth of knowledge. You had philosophers and a lot of artists, scholars, or what have you, all because the Moors taught that information. If they had it before this time, where was it? It's because the Moors gave them that information. So when people say, well, the Moors, brought the Dark Ages into the Renaissance, the proof is right there. I just explained it to you. It's undeniable, unmistakable. This is what happened. So that's what happens when you start giving people this kind of information. They start to flourish and they start to use it and start to create amazing things. So, right around this time when you have Ferdinand and Isabella on the throne, our guy good old Christopher Columbus, who didn't discover shit. Christopher Columbus, believe it or not, was inside the Alhambra castle that the Moors built, getting the blessing from Queen Isabella and Ferdinand to basically go and do what he was doing. Now, make no mistake, Columbus was a Roman. He was a Roman. He was just under the control of Spaniards, who was basically Romans. As I said, but he was a Roman. So he got the blessing to basically go out and do what he was doing. And on that ship, he had Moors. Everybody always talk about, well, it was black people on Columbus ship that helped him find America. There was Moors. Moors helped him do what he was doing. And you have to think about around this time. We're talking about, 15th, 16th century AD. Now, Europe is conquered. As I said, Europe is conquered. It's done. But remember, you have the rest of Africa untouched. It's still kingdoms in power in Africa. Remember, I talked about you have the Congo kingdom along the Swahili coast. You have the Kerma kingdom. You have so many kingdoms still in Africa existing. Mali, Songhai, still existing. Meanwhile, Northern Africa, kaput. Europe, kaput, all in the hands of European power. So you can look at the time frame. Look at what's going on. Right around this time, you see people, these African rulers start to switch into Islam or Christianity. You've seen what happened. So when you go look at the Songhai Empire, you look at Sunni Ali, or what have you, and them converting into Islam. Mansa Musa, supposedly the richest man of all time, converting into Islam. A lot of these African leaders in Mali and Songhai converting to Islam. But it was a trap. It was a setup anyway. It didn't matter if they converted or not. Those lands were supposed to come under control of the Europeans. And that's what happened. Because even though they converted, as I said before, you got to think about it. When the Songhai Empire was at war with the Europeans, where was the Muslims? There's no way in the world the Europeans should have been able to take the Songhai Empire with the help of the Arabs. But it was a trap. It was a setup anyway. And those kingdoms, as I said, those warrior families was enslaved all throughout Africa. Their castles in ruins because there was the last remaining threat. Well, not the last yet. Get into that. Matter of fact, yeah, there was the last because this is after. Okay, so I'll talk about this in a second. But there was the last remaining threat to Europe, to Rome. Why? Because they had the knowledge. They had the knowledge of math and astrology and what have you. And eventually they would find out what happened. They knew that people ruled up in Europe. They understood it because they were trading with them for years. They understand it was a change in power. So to make that transition smooth, of course, as I said, they didn't kill all the Africans in power, the black people. They intermarried them. And eventually they breeded them out. But, it was only going to be, for a small amount of time. So when you had these Africans ruling in Africa, converting to Islam, when it was taken over, they was enslaved. The ones who didn't want to, act right, they was enslaved. And we are basically the descendants of them, over in America. So all those leaders in Benin and all throughout Africa, Congo, what have you, was basically enslaved by the Portuguese. I mean, when you see slavery starting out, as far as the European slavery, just, again, the timeline. Look at the timeline. The time don't lie. This is how we kill the whole religious thing, because the time doesn't fit. It's the same thing here. Look at the timeline. You have the end of the Dark Ages, bringing about the whole Knights Templar, the whole war and everything. We're going to get into the whole Crusades too real fast in a quick second, because the Templars, again, big part. But just look at the timeline. Right around this time, you have the Renaissance, you have all this stuff going on. You have still African kingdoms and power, but then all of a sudden you get this transatlantic slave trade. You get this whole slave trade. You get the Portuguese all of a sudden going crazy, enslaving the crap out of Africans all in Spain, because that's basically what they was doing. The Africans that was left in Spain enslaved. When the Portuguese, and when they got their hands on guns, because guns was the main thing that basically ended any kind of, war. Once the Europeans got their hands on the cannon and guns, it was over. They went into Africa and basically took, what they wanted to take. They didn't venture into Central Africa because they pussies. That's why you need a gun when you're a pussy, because even with guns, they wouldn't have survived. There's so many other things there besides the people, which they would have been surrounded, that would have killed them. But so many, animals and diseases or what have you, that probably would have killed them before any people. So they can't really go into Central Africa and conquer into there, which is why a lot of places still exist to this day. If you pay attention to the map, they went all on the outer part of Africa. Top part, Northern Africa, they have South Africa, all the coastlines is where they went and basically conquered. They never ventured inside because they knew even with guns, they was doomed. But with guns, they can fire cannons from off the shore, from the waters. They can do what they needed to do. When you look at a lot of those African castles, they're right on coastlines. The same thing when I was showing you guys in the picture when I went to the Mallorca, you can see all the castles there. You always can see the ocean from each of the castles. They up high or they right next to the water. So this is what happened to the Africans, and they was basically, enslaved. So again, go real quick back to the whole war with the Knights Templar, the whole so-called Crusades. And you got to understand, now I talked about this before, remember, I talked about how Muslims was Knights Templar, how the Muslims was a part of the Knights Templar and everything they tried to hide. Again, put the pieces together. The Moors. The Moors was the ones who basically passed their knowledge down to the Knights Templar. So when you had this connection with the Muslims and the Moors, you can't leave out. The Muslims and the Knights Templars, you can't leave out the Moors. The Moors was a part of that. The job of the Knights Templars was basically to go out there and get rid of the people that was in power. It was almost like an assassination squad, even though it was a bunch of them and everything like that. But you still had like a small group that was like the top dudes that was going out and assassinating leaders in Rome. So you got to understand, one, when the Moors taught this information to the Knights Templars, that was a mistake, because the Knights Templars now had this information and knowledge. So if you remember in the Da Vinci Code, he was talking about how the Knights Templars just all of a sudden was given this unlimited power by the papacy. And then the papacy basically had them killed, and they basically, it's true, but it's not the way that they put it. This deals with the Moors. So when I titled this thing, when I put in the title of Real Assassin's Creed, this is where it comes from. The Knights Templar was a threat to the church because they had the knowledge of the Moors. And the Moors was in pocket, plain and simple, but the Knights Templar commanded this huge army. Plain and simple, the leaders had this knowledge. Of course, the whole army didn't, but a small group. These leaders had this information from the Moors, and there was a threat to the papacy. And the Assassin's Creed, if you pay attention to the game, is about the Knights Templar, the corporation that created the Animus. At the top of it are Knights Templar. What are they trying to do? They're trying to get this information. They're trying to get descendants, if you pay attention, most of them Spanish descendants, to go into the Animus to get the memories that their ancestors had, to collect these pieces. Supposed to be I think it was called the Apple of Eden or something like that, to where when you get all the pieces, you get this knowledge, the knowledge to control free will or what have you. What are they talking about here? It's basically talking about the Moors and the Knights Templar, plain and simple. Because the Moors gave the Knights Templar this information, and the real Assassin's Creed was these Portuguese assassins that was hired to go wipe out the Knights Templar, the ones at the top who had this information. When you play the game Assassin's Creed, who are you killing? Throughout the game, you're killing a buttload of Knights Templar. A lot of people never put this stuff together. So you have coming up later on the new Assassin's Creed game, where they have Assassin's Creed's Origin, I think it's called, with Kemet. It's trying to give you a hint. It's all going back to that, because that's where the knowledge of the Moors came from anyway. So it's all going back to that. So all this stuff comes together. It all gives you a picture. It all gives you a history that you can piece together to put together this history. So it's something that if you're not really paying attention to history, to a lot of the small things of history, you will look past a lot of this stuff. The Moors and the Knights Templar, again, you just got to pay attention to the time frame. Because if we're talking about around this time coming out of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance, and we know Moors is synonymous with Muslims, how can you leave out the Moors when it comes to the Knights Templars if the Muslims was with the Knights Templar? As I proved that point. You can't do it. So you got to understand, it was teaching them this information. Now, what they try to accuse the Knights Templar of basically like worshiping Baphomet, because the Moors came up with Baphomet. They basically encoded it into the Quran, to Islam. And that's one of the things they taught the Knights Templar, the codes of the religious doctrines. So when you look into Islam, into the book, they taught them what Rome basically did. So when you look up Baphomet, it says Baphomet is a term originally used to describe an idol or other deity that the Knights Templar were accused of worshiping. And if you scroll down, and this is where it gets into the whole Islam part of it, because it says here clearly, Baphomet equals Muhammad. Again, this is, when you decode all this stuff, it's too much to get into now, but something we'll get into later. It's basically was telling them this is where, this is the code, this is what the Romans have, this is the secret. So they knew basically what the hidden code of the Bible and Islam and the Torah, what have you, was. The Knights Templar had that information along with the Moors, and they had to wipe them out for that. So this is what the Assassin's Creed was really about. It was going out, wiping out Knights Templar, not just them, Moors as well, the ones anybody who had this information or knowledge that basically they didn't have a hold on, the Knights Templar, the Moors, or what have you. The Assassin's Creed, with the assassins was going out and wiping them out. This is already documented in Spain about the Portuguese assassins that was going out and wiping out the Knights Templar, and they was just around. It was known as the assassins. So this is where Assassin's Creed come from. This is why the castle, when I was in there, it just so happens I took a picture with the Knights Templar crest or what have you. The reason why I took that picture is because it's in the part of the castle or the cathedral that was supposed to be the Muslim mosque built by the Moors. So it's weird that they will put this whole Knights Templar crest and everything here in relation with Moors and Muslims. Trying to tell you something. So a lot of things you got to really pay attention to the clues that they give you. So getting back into Columbus, having a Moor going out into the Americas. Pay attention to how the Portuguese was basically enslaving everybody, the Africans, and how you get Spanish people into so-called Latin America. Plain and simple. They was in there bringing in Africans, setting up civilizations, and then eventually enslaving the people that was there, mixing in. I mean, so much mixing going on to where the fact that, Spanish people don't know where the hell they come from. They just don't know. They relate more with us, black people, than they do with the Spanish, with the Latin people in Spain, So you got to just look at the history and see how everything just fits, how everything works out. But the main point is to understand that none of this wouldn't be done. I mean, Columbus couldn't got to where he got to without a Moor. You got to understand that. The Moors betrayed us. So when you go back and you look at the depictions, once the colonies established America, what have you, and you start seeing those pictures of the dudes with turbans, Moors, with George Washington. Benjamin Banneker was supposed to be a Moor who helped set up the Masonic layout of Washington, D.C. Masonry comes from the Moors. Plain and simple. All this stuff starts to get established and set up. You start to understand what's taking place. So you had these Moors come in and, basically start to, set up America. And, the Moors basically disappear over time. One, because they was being assassinated. You see these pictures of the Moors, black people, fez, and the turban, as early as, the 19th century, 1800s, or what have you, early 1900s, you can still see Moors. All of a sudden, it's like no more Moors. They're not giving no credit for nothing. Well, they give them credit in some cases, but we don't know about them really that much in early American history. But they played a big part. So, bringing the Africans over, slavery, what have you, the Moors, complete traitors. They they sabotaged Africa. They destroyed so many civilizations with the help of the Europeans. They are not to be glorified or to be thought of as this great people who did something great for African people, because they didn't. With the knowledge that they had, even once Europe did fall to the barbarians, to the Aryans or what have you, the Moors could have brought us out of it if they just took our side instead of side with the Romans or what have you. But they didn't. And, the history that ensued is on them. Nowhere in the world that they will be able to conquer so much land, so much civilization that they conquer without the help of the Moors. Plain and simple. And make no mistake, you got to understand, with Christianity, what has its rules or what have you, which is it's the perfect deceptive religion, because it kind of makes you fight with yourself and want materialistic things on the inside. You know what I'm saying? So while you're trying to follow the Bible and be about the Bible, what have you, you can't fight natural human urges to want materialistic things. So one of the things that they did when they got into Mallorca, Spain, when they built the cathedral, is when Catholicism was set up. When I was walking around in there, everywhere you walk, you can see here, it's just Christian stuff everywhere. The crosses, crowns, and what have you. And the cathedral is huge. It's unbelievable. And, it's all about Christianity. That was the thing that they had to really instill in us, because they knew we come from a spiritual background. Christian section. Come here and see all the old Christian art they have in here, which they have a lot. That cross they be carrying around. You can see it right here. Bullshit, of course. I want to get to the Moors section and see what they have on the Moors here. If they have anything, it's probably mostly Christian stuff. They try to modernize. Mostly Christian. See all this witchcraft every goddamn where. Check it out, people. Witchcraft everywhere. These people have no clue. Witches. That's all they are. But ain't nothing wrong with that for real. So this is what I want white people, any white people watching, the Europeans or what have you, whatever you want to call yourself, humans. This is what you need to understand. And this is going back, to melanin. And understanding what this stuff is really about. And, some of you, this is going to be hard for you to accept or to even believe, and you might not want to believe it, but do the research and understand. What they don't want you to understand is they robbed you of spirituality, true spirituality, and what the ancient Egyptians was trying to help you out. They were trying to help you guys. And plain and simple, one, you got to understand melanin, what it really is. Melanin, your pineal gland, our pineal gland is secreted in melanin. You get melatonin from the secretion of melanin, serotonin, and all this stuff controls, motor skills and, movement and thought and, just so many functions of the body, which is why genetically, when Africans say they're more superior genetically, this is what they mean. It's because melanin has so much control with the body. Your organs and everything is secreting in melanin when you're African, when you're black, which is why they're stealing African organs and not white organs. They're stealing the organs of black people. This is already another thing that's documented. So they robbed you of being able to fix this problem by conquering. And you got to understand, so when you have the secretion of melanin, one, the pineal gland of Europeans, between 50 and 80% of it is calcified. It's a fact. You can look it up yourself. It's calcified. So you already have that problem, one. Two, you don't have melanin secreting the pineal gland, helping it out. So when you start to understand what melanin is doing and inducing the dream state and the role it plays in the dream state, we're talking about spirituality. We're talking about the main thing that's going to help you reach the final level, to get to this point, to ignite 7 chakras, whatever you want to call it, you can't do it. And that's a fact. So it's a sense of understanding, more so like a longing sense, an internal sense from white people that I've been seeing for a long time. And it's a part of them that understands this, that's longing for some kind of, some fit somewhere. This is why, white people travel. They go all throughout the world to try to find themselves, to try to find their places. They meditate, they do yoga. They do so many spiritual things to try to get what their body is yearning for. And that is this connection to spirituality that they won't get completely, only a little bit. Because Europeans still have some melanin, but not enough. So you can't reach the full state of spirituality that an African can. Your dreams are in no way like ours. And it's probably hard for you to understand because I can't, of course, see your dreams. But based on the understanding that we have of melanin and what it does to the brain and inducing a dream state, it can't be. It just can't be. So spiritually, you are not able to get what you need to ascend. And this is what they robbed you of. And they don't ever want you to get this kind of understanding of that, because then you'll be trying to fix it. Understand, the powers that be, whoever it is that is running things, needs you here on the planet to do whatever it is. They need fear. They need to feed off of it. They need something. They need people here. So if Africans have the ability to ascend and not come back eventually by process of elimination, at some point, all black people should be gone. Once the knowledge and understanding comes into play, we should be gone, because we're not going to want to come back here understanding the situation unless we change it before that. But by the powers that be being able to keep Europeans here, they can keep the energy they need to feed off here forever. So when you hear people talking about the rapture and the people who is right with God gone and everybody else being left below, believe it or not, that's what they're talking about. This is all a part of that. So if you have the power to transcend and to move forward, you can do so. This is what melanin gives us the power to do. This is why they give you a leg up in the world. This is why they cheat for European people, because you just don't have it. And I'm not trying to be racist or mean or nothing like that. This is fact. And my goal has been trying to help you understand this, to help you gain this melanin, to gain this situation, this power back, so you become truly spiritual. De Niro figured it out. This is the reason why a lot of these rich Europeans marry back into African bloodlines, because they understand. The key one, you need at some point, you need to be back in the bloodline. This is what they was trying to fix. Unless you come back into African bloodline, you won't fix the problem. You're just going to continue a cycle of no spirituality. You'll stay here. Unless you come back into the bloodline and stay in the bloodline to keep it going and bring your energy back into a body that is melanated so it can gain the knowledge needed to ascend, you will forever come back here. It's just a fact. I mean, I know it's hard to believe, but when you research it to this point, as long as I have, you'll see that it's true. Now, I know it's going to be hard to accept and for people to really grasp that concept, but it's why it seems like, Africans are more spiritual. And they understood, the Europeans, the Aryans understood exactly how to sucker us into control by giving us something that's spiritual, because we basically move in spirituality. We're surrounded by it. Melanated people are melanin is spiritual. This is why you have people say, melanin is biological living light, and the properties that it has and what it does as far as its effects on the brain and the dream state is amazing. It's just something that's amazing that, is documented. So again, like I said, it's hard to accept for Europeans, and it's something that I've done years of research on and looked into, and because you have to understand why, what is it? And it's a lot more to it, of course, as I get into in a certain series or what have you. There's a lot more to all of this, but you have to ask yourself why. What is it? So much hate for black people for what? Because our skin color, what? If you hate us because we sold drugs and everything, CIA gave it to us. The white people gave us this stuff. If you hate us because we poor, they made us poor. They put us in every negative situation that we are in. Wow, what is going on? Why are we not allowed to rise, to come together, to do anything? Why is hip hop so popular? We're living in the hip hop culture, something that is destroying black people. A lot of people just don't want to put it together and say, what is it about black people that they hate, that they want to keep down, that they at all costs do not want us to unite? And you can look at Obama and say that's a score one for black people. Of course not. So many black people died under his office, under his reign as president, might as well say. So it's all deception. And all of it has to do with black people, but most of it has to do with deceiving white people and to get you to understand that they are destroying you spiritually. And so many white people are so corrupt and so far out of African bloodlines where they have no empathy. And that's basically what they have, no empathy at all. They don't care. They just so fueled with hate and racism, and I don't even understand why, because they was taught that. And if racism has to be kept there, the separation has to be kept there, because, in a unity, we will understand that we got a common enemy. So you got to look at this and understand that they are destroying you spiritually, plain and simple. And, you have a lot of white people that want to accept Jesus Christ and this and that, and not even rationally think about that. Some people want to accept him because they think he's white or what have you, when you got to ask yourself, your scientists tell you that, well, you can't get a white person without a black person. So Jesus can't be white. He had to come from a black person. God can't be white. So you got to think about that. You got to really be real with yourself and put ego to the side. Put the fact that a black man is telling you this to the side. Do your own research and understand that there's no malice in my heart, no hate at all for anybody. That this is all truth that's coming out, and it's a lot more to it. So this is just a small part of it, but they're destroying you spiritually. It's just that simple. Melanin is a major thing. I believe the problem can be fixed scientifically without reincarnation, to tell you the truth. Genetically, I think they can do it. Now, this day with the science we have, I don't think you have to die and, marry into a black family. I think this can be genetically fixed because we've seen it done with Dr. Keith Chang and the zebrafish. What happened when he injected that fish back with the right cells? The stripes came back. So you got to think about that. I think this can be fixed. They just don't ever want it to be fixed because they will lose control. So, they can literally give you back spirituality by regenerating your cells to make it increase your melanin, which would turn you black. But at least spiritually, you won't have to, deal with hell, because that's what this place is going to turn into. So it's just something to think about and stuff for you to do your own research on. But black people, at the same time, we got to fix our shit as well. But just understand that, the reason why we couldn't just coexist with the Aryans when they was coming down is because they really couldn't accept the ancient Egyptians and the Africans and what was going on spiritually. All they could see was the possessions that Africans had, and they felt like, well, with all this knowledge and technology, it's stupid that y'all focusing so much on the spiritual stuff and death instead of concentrating on the here and now and making this place better for everybody. This is what the Europeans was thinking, because they wasn't, spiritual. The Aryans, they wasn't spiritual people. They couldn't really understand it. They could only grasp the material. And you got to really think about why they put the whole concept of Satan and them as Satan in the Bible, because that's basically, when you understand who they describe it as Satan, when I talk about the lower brain. So we fell because the lower brain. Who brought us the lower brain? Who put us in the lower brain state? It was the Europeans. It was the Aryans that put us in the lower brain state. And it's because the lower brain that we fell. The lower brain is what got these Moors to basically accept the gold and the money and the riches to betray us. The lower brain is the reason why we forgot about spirituality and jumped into the whole materialistic thing and thinking that gold and riches is the key of life, when it's spirituality. It's the lower brain. So you had the Aryans come and bring this whole lower brain mentality to the world. So when I say that the government, and we say that white people is the devil, this is what we mean by that. This is what we mean by the government system. This whole system, this whole satanic system is surrounded by all of this. And it's all about, forgetting spirituality and accepting materialism, and it being the downfall of spirituality and of African people throughout the world. So we got to get it back. We got to understand it. We got to accept that this is what happened to us and why it happened, and we got to act accordingly. So this is one of the reasons why I do what I do. So, with black people, it's crazy in Africa how much they turn. I mean, look what happened to Patrice Lumumba. It's hard to even watch the footage of Africans dragging this man to his death. And it's like, what are you doing? You have to really understand, how much we betray each other. And this is why the music is so perfect, because they know we have this. They did it to us in slavery. When you look at a lot of the slave pictures, you'll see the African. They make one of the slaves beat another slave. So this developed animosity, and they was having sex with the wives of slaves and what have you. And it's just so much animosity between us. And yes, the civil rights movement did before that, end of slavery and all the racism and segregation and what have you, did create unity, which is why they had to end it, because we was becoming too united and too focused. And they seen places like Black Wall Street flourish, and they knew because of our unity that this is what happened. So they had to stop that. So if we don't get that back, if we don't unite and understand what's going on, it's over. It's just over. And by the same token, if we fall, the rest of the white people fall, and these people at the top will stay at the top, ruling whoever is left here at some point. So it sounds crazy, spooky kind of sort of, but it's the facts. It's what everything leads you to, the understanding of, and it's the truth. So when you start putting the pieces together, this is what you will come up with. But the Moors, it's not even worth getting too much more into it. This is the story right here. This is who they were. This is what they did. So when you fast forward to modern day and look at these Moors that's popping up associated with Islam, ask yourself the question, one, you have the Moors associated with Islam. You have Noble Drew Ali coming through with the Fez and bringing Islam and what have you. You have Elijah Muhammad with the Fez. Then you have the Shriners with the Fez. And what is Truman doing with the Fez? What is these white people doing with Fezes on? That's have Muslim words. What is this? So when I did the whole video about Islam and how it's controlled by Rome and everything like that, all of this comes into play. So if you've seen that video, you see how it all fits in now, and understanding that, one, all this stuff goes back to the Moors. The Moors brought this stuff about. These Moors we see walking around today, these clueless black dudes who claim that they Moors or what have you. I got a lot of y'all looking up to them, thinking that they, conscious Moors, and they traitors, man. They traitors. And they trace their religion back. They trace the Moors back to Islam, thinking that has to do with Islam, and it's all bullshit. Yes, if you're a Moor, you probably understand what it's really talking about as far as Islam. And you can pertain that to black people. And some Moors do that. You have some Moors who call themselves the good Moors, understanding the real history and the deception of the old Moors. And they say, well, no, we represent the Moors before the deception, and they'll distinguish themselves as such. And they'll only really deal with the Quran as far as the esoteric knowledge that's hidden within it. But it's hard to really separate the two. My whole thing is I say leave it alone. Let's not even deal with no Moors, nothing. Just be conscious black folks and leave it at that. Because in my book, they traitors. And whenever I see a Moor or, somebody with a fucking fez or a turban, I'm ready to spit in their face. Like Nick Cannon running around with a fez, with a turban, and I don't think he understands. Well, he do understand what it is, what it's about, but, he's a sellout. So it is what it is. So you had the Moors popping up now. You have the whole Boule, to me, one and the same. You call them the new sellouts. And you look at the picture and you can see where all this stuff comes into place. Again, the Moors established it all and they set everything up. So, this was a video that I wanted to really get out to get this understanding. And it's probably a video you probably got to watch again and watch probably some of my other videos to tie all this stuff in. But we look at Africa, we see Africans enslaving Africans still to this day, forcing them into Islam, thinking that it's really ours when it's not. A lot of people are deceived because of the Moors, lack of knowledge. And this is one of the reasons why I put out information, whether you accept it or not. My goal is to get you to at least do the research and look into it yourself. So if you do that, you'll come out with the same outcome as the video. I just saved you a shitload of time and a lot of books that you don't have to read. But do the research. You'll see that it's all true. And it's going to be some walls you're going to run into that you got to know how to get around to get into to the correct understanding. Because when you hit a wall and then you try to couple everything that you learned up until that point, it's not going to fit. It won't work. It won't work as far as history-wise. It won't fit. So my goal is to make everything fit and not to accept, what's in the books. So I don't just read a book and say, okay, he's right. I got to make everything fit. So I want you guys to do the same as well. But I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch, taking the time to purchase and support. I've been traveling. Just came from Spain. Going to be headed to Kemet, Thailand, a couple other places, many places I came before the year is out. Thanks for the support. Thanks to everybody who donated, who's looking out for the website. The book will be out soon. Books 2 will be out. I'm going to announce those coming up. More videos to come on YouTube as well. I had computer problems. So I have, computer basically needed to be upgraded to deal. It was old, not a problem. So I had to get a new computer. So I really couldn't put out as much as I wanted to. So, thanks for the support from everybody who supported, everybody who followed on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So at The Real Merkaba, if you're not following yet, definitely follow. I'm going to definitely do a live stream from Kemet when I get there. If the signal's good, I'm going to live stream straight from the pyramids. And I want you guys to check that out and, check out everything that's coming. Part 2 of Buddhism is going to probably be out right after this, and some other DVDs as well coming. But thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and see you guys next video.